Just that you know, I mean, we have a kind of a mini session down there in that corner for some of our mobile wearables. Just that you know, feel free to want. Don't be surprised if we start talking there.
No problem. Just let us know if we're too noisy.
No, it's cool. Yeah, well, I would if that's the case, but just go for it. Cool. So welcome everyone. So today we are in room A146, and feel free to participate. It's a bit of a short notice, I guess, that we changed the meeting deadline, but I hope everyone has a chance to catch up on what we're doing here right now. Else we need to use what's the tool of choice right now? The issue tracker, I believe, on Bitbucket, right? Was something Marius suggested. You guys should comment to.
Actually, there is a
Blackboard
discussion.
Only Blackboard? Okay, a Blackboard. Cool. Because there's various ways for various courses. So cool. So who's here? Johnny, cool, and Vino, right? Cool. So two people. We probably want to see all of them. Well, to some extent. Okay, cool. So it's the three of us. How cozy. I'm not sure why I'm in the center. I probably should be on the side rather. So cool. All right. So I think the format is as follows, right? All of you basically explore what you did, so first of all, what your topic is, and how far you come through the topic or settle somewhat, what you did so far, what you plan to do, right? Those are the key aspects. Is anyone particularly willing to start here? Guys, so, yep.
So last week I got the new topic, the hand gesture detection.
Yep.
So I was working on that. So I was searching in Google. First of all, I tried to get some sample point cloud.
Yeah.
But I didn't find any ready-made data to do the testing. But I installed the SDK and all other stuff, and I went through some documentation and some videos.
Yeah.
So if I can get the data this week or next week, so I can start it.
So just to put it in perspective, just for the bigger picture, because your topic is new, right? So it's a really fresh idea, and just to retracing for what you say, so using the Kinect, right? So you're fixing the Kinect in some sort of setup environment, right? And then you wanted to detect basic hand gestures, right? Right, and do some sort of movement and gestures and act on those, right? Cool. So you eventually need a device, right? But right now you want to do it synthetically, right? So you want to use a given data set and only focus on the detection.
Yeah, then I can avoid if the device is not available. Or if I can capture some data from the sandbox IR itself, I can copy the data from the PC. Then processing is very easy. They have the SDKs and I can make the entire
Right. So you want to okay, cool. That's a good point. So what do you think is the most challenging bit?
Challenging bit without getting the data, I can't say, but I explored that SDK. So they have some hand gesture detection SDKs, but I don't know how it will work in our sandbox data. But in normal data, they have some ready-made APIs for hand gesture detection. But here I have to do some sort of filtering or something based on the depth information.
Yeah.
So there is something from the bottom in the detector's hand because a lot of patterns are there. But if I know that the hand will come at this side, and the sample this much depth below, so I can remove those parts and those things like this.
So just to contextualize further, in case anyone wants to follow up on what we're talking about, you want to work on the augmented reality sandbox, right? So the idea is there that we have an environment with topology, and you can model there with using scent, and there's some projection on top of it. For example, a topology like a geography. But the challenging thing is there. Okay, if you model and you use the depth perception of the Kinect, how do you differentiate actually from hand gestures, from hand movements, right? And your suggestion is, well, you just look at the elevation, right? If there's a sudden drop in elevation, then it can only be a hand, right? So that's the idea. Because scent can't be, stacked vertically, so it's always this is an angle. And I think it's maybe worthwhile to look up the angles for materials. So you could actually identify what are the maximum stacking angles that materials can possibly have, right? So exactly. For example, I think for sand, I think by memory right now it's 33 degrees. So you will never be able to have unless you make it wet. You will, for dry sand, you will never be able to have a higher degree. So it's for you very easy to set a threshold, right? So and even if we were to use other materials, we should be able to parameterize in your model, what this threshold could or should be.
So if it is sand or something else,
exactly.
The angle will change.
That may the possible maximum angle would.
I can take it as a parameter into my code.
Yeah, exactly. But that looks good. So I think right now it's probably good for you to see what's out there and get the data, right, and get going. But eventually, I think we also need to think about kind of the kind of tool chain or workflow your model goes through, right? So what you do, right? So you capture the data, you filter the data, you separate hands from the actual topology. You most likely need to deal with some noise, I guess.
Yeah, we need to filter out some noise.
So we need to think about how that flow looks like, so then you can have exactly. So you have a more structured review at the end, because in the end, part of your submissible deliverable is a report as well. Right. And a report is probably, I mean, personally, if I'm writing reports, it's generally easiest for me, or any sort of thesis, you name it, whatever. It's really to structure your literature review. And that's actually very easy if you have that tool chain as a conceptual model, and then you can just dig deep in those respective areas if you write up your report, right? So it just makes your life easy. But we get there when we get there, because we still quite don't know the hard challenges, right? We know there are challenges along the way, but some of them may be easy to solve or are solved already, and you may find code, which is fine.
But once I have the data, I can identify how it should be.
Cool. So you know what to do, right?
Yeah. Only the uncertainty is from where I can get the data.
Yeah. In worst case, we just need to take a connect and get some point cloud and kind of store it somewhere, and then and you take probably, I don't know how you do this. Take a video as well at the same time, synchronized video, so actually know whether you can validate your data set, right? Because you need to tag it, right? So it may be the case that the Connect tells you, well, there's actually a hand there, or your model tells you, but it actually is not. So you need to be able to do that. Exactly. You just need to synchronize the time code somehow. So,
or I can take 3D data with hand and without hand.
Yeah, cool. Right, that's even easier. Exactly. You do true. Right, that's a good point. Sweet. So now I think we're on the right track there. So I'm very convinced. You kind of need to catch up a bit, I guess. But if you, since it always takes time to formulate the model to some extent, the topic. But I think you can, because you have your mind to it, and you're on the right track. And we have something to actually validate it in the sandbox ultimately. So we'll see how that goes. Cool. Sorry.
Yeah, my topic is object detection using TensorFlow.
Right. So object detection using TensorFlow. Okay.
Yeah. So what I want to detect is melanoma, skin cancer. Zula already has a data set that I can use to train the model. So I haven't come that far yet, but I'm still learning how to use TensorFlow, and currently I'm programming in Python. But I want to do it in make a mobile app. So take a picture of the skin.
I see where you're going.
Detect if it's healthy or unhealthy. I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Cool. So you have the data set, and you are writing an app in Python right now for desktop machines, I assume, right? So, and you're just
going through tutorials on TensorFlow.
Okay, cool.
Also, I have last week I installed Android Studio, and built TensorFlow examples.
Yeah.
So I have the code, so I can probably modify that code to fit my model. If detecting.
So the training you have done some system level only the training part you will implement in some server or somewhere.
Yeah, the model will be trained on a computer and transferred to the mobile because the computation is huge. So on mobile that's not effective. So, but if you have a pre-trained model and then export it to the phone, it's pretty fast.
Yeah. Right, and then you just take. Do you have pictures?
Yeah, pictures and labels. So it's Sula is working on something related to that, but it was okay to do this. She said.
And do you expect challenges with respect to the mobile phone there? For example, camera quality and things like that? Is that an issue or?
I don't know yet, but definitely on older phones, it's probably going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
I was thinking about our Galaxy S8, so the camera is pretty good.
Yep.
So it's probably, hopefully, going to work there.
Yeah. I think it will. So that is something. So, but that is probably something you need to think about in your report as well. Perhaps you can get hold of, once you have the app, probably make it worthwhile to actually, ideally, write it, keep it compatible to older SDKs, APIs, Android APIs. So, it may be still running on ISP percentage or whatever else. So the idea would there be, once you have, if you get to that stage anyway, once you have it on your phone, everything works fine. So you just use older phones and see if they are, how far the camera makes a difference. Because I bet we still have older phones lying around here somewhere. And that would be easy just to install and see how it goes. Because I think that's something that definitely needs to be considered in your report, because you're talking about mobile phones in particular, right? What are the challenges there? And I think processing is probably one of them as well. Yeah. But picture quality will be, I think, the central thing. And just to keep your mind open there, that you want to hopefully be able to test that on different devices. Yeah. And if you write the app, it's kind of a no-brainer. Just run it, see how it goes, and see what the boundaries are. And perhaps you can even make a recommendation. Say, well, if you actually want to do that, have at least Android version so and so, because most likely phone quality or camera quality is sufficiently high. I mean, no guarantees. There's too much fragmentation in the market, but that you would see you need at least Android 6, and then you can be reasonably sure that the camera will be high enough quality to do what it is. Yeah. So are there any barriers right now? Like roadblocks?
No, it's been going quite well.
Yep.
Most of the guides is in Linux, so transferring to Windows environment is sometimes getting some barriers, but usually there's some fix on the internet. So.
Cool. Can you share how do you do it in Windows then?
Both TensorFlow and Android Studio works well.
Yeah.
It's when the guides are in Linux, it's like you have to translate.
Right.
Some commands.
But it's not a deal breaker.
No, it's been fine so far.
There's something to keep an eye on, but it's perhaps even also something there. I mean, if there may be value putting that in your report. I mean, in the sense that, what are the steps to actually get TensorFlow running on Windows? Like, so actually, if anyone else is doing it, you can actually just, take your report and go from there. So actually, it's a contribution in itself. Yeah, I think quite valuable, because those little hiccups and challenges are something that usually you don't really find in research papers, because they conveniently ignore those little detailed aspects. But I think in a particular report here, it may be quite worthwhile to actually go into that and explore that. Plus, also, I think your topic is a really good investment in your skill set, because knowing, TensorFlow would be really valuable for your future in whatever area you go, because most likely you will come about some sort of deep learning framework anyway. So you need to.
And I'm also doing the deep learning in my master's.
Cool. So cool, perfect. Are you using TensorFlow as well there? Or?
Not decided, but probably.
Yeah.
Since my supervisor also had knowledge about TensorFlow. So.
Right. Cool. Interesting. Cool. No roadblocks there. No roadblocks there. Cool. Yep. So it's the next step, but it's possibly not totally unfeasible, right? So So
some other lab they have a
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about if we, I'll just write it down myself and ask Simon about the Kinect, because we want, as mentioned before, we probably want to buy some anyway. I'm seeing what the process is on that right now.
Okay.
And whether it's 1 or 2 and so on, so which version we're dealing with. So it may, you know, so you can actually write your model against either one of them eventually. So once
version, latest version, released from 2013, the version 2.
Right. So, but I think we still have version 1 here right now.
Oh, okay, there is version 1.
I think so, yeah. So the current sandbox. So I'm not sure if we have access to the latest one at this stage. But anyway, they want to order one, so we that's a good idea. So to think about it. Cool.
Okay, then if you are ordering, then you can replace that with version 2. Is that possible in
that was basically the idea, exactly.
Oh.
So doing at the same time doing an upgrade, so we don't waste time and committing to old hardware. But it also means for you that you want to keep your contribution, your module, as flexible as possible, right? So you just so you can connect it.
Will be flexible to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I just move over here. Ah, yeah, somebody's joining us, so please coming at the right time here. So while you're doing all your works, I recommend personally, I would recommend you to document those things, because in the end, if you document all your challenges and things and decisions you made, it makes it a lot faster to write up your report, because you don't need to recollect it at that stage, because in the end it will just be anything of your comments in a wider sense, because you have the keywords already, and then the story kind of will come on its own-ish. And it's way easier than to think, oh, what did I do there? I mean, I hacked around for an entire week. But you know how problem solving is. You figure you waste 1 or 2 days on figuring out a problem. You find a solution, you forget about it. So, but actually, this is the learning, right? So you want to capture that, so that actually someone else can actually see what you actually gained in terms of experience over time. Because a lot of our experience is not really on paper. A lot of experience is something you take away from them, from whatever you're doing in the first place. So I think it's best practice to have some kind of lab notes. Or it can be digital or whatever. It doesn't need to be a full sentence. It's just like, what was the following problem? I don't know, running TensorFlow or getting TensorFlow compiled on Windows. Here, Stack Overflow link. That was how I solved it. That kind of work. And then later on, if you think in your report, I need to include that, you can still go into that link and actually check what happened there, just to recall what you actually did. Not really writing the full solution. But oftentimes I personally just write down the commands that I used to figure out the problem, and then the link where I got the information from, for example, or whatever. But it's up to you how you do it. For you, for example, where do you get your source, right? The sources, if you find your data models, or what are the constraints for Kinect 1 and 2, right? So what you need to bear in mind.
In 2 it will be easy. For 1 I have to do some extra process.
Yep. I think so. Exactly, I think so as well. And it's kind of one of those stupid investments, because you're basically downgrading your model to an older version, but expending more effort in doing so, right? So I agree with you. So we should actually work on 2, but it's good. So I make this reminder for myself. In fact, that is something me too. Cool. Person number 3.
Yes. So if you remember, I proposed last week, what I will do is I will create an application. First step, that is in which I provide the location, longitude and latitude, and I will say that if I am in the distance with respect to that particular location, then some event should trigger, be a reminder or something. So today morning, while coming just now, I actually tested it.
Okay.
It's working.
It's working well. Cool.
Yes, I put the reminder at the location entrance of G building. And from the distance 300 meters. And I think it was more or less 300 meters.
Sure.
So the thing is there. So I think the first step is more or less done.
The
only thing is, right now I am hard coding the values of location and the longitude and the latitude, for which there has to be a reminder. For the user convenience, as I said, that from the map he can select.
So that would be one way. I also think another way would be to say, take the current location, because sometimes you want to set up whatever reminder appointment and so on,
when you actually, for example, I'm just making it up here. Let's say you're in the library, right? So, and you actually, they tell you, you ordered a book, it's here in 3 weeks or whatever else. So you can just, in your app, ideally click, mark this point right now where I am. So user actually doesn't even need to use the map to just say where I am. You get the current location, use that as possible info. So just from a convenience point of view, I would offer both options, me selecting remote place, me selecting the current place I'm in. So it makes it really easy. And then the distance, and I think, so that sounds pretty cool. So you use the proximity listener, right? Or to activate the event in Android?
There's something known as location manager.
Yeah.
Location, that's what I have used. I can show you the code also.
Okay. Okay, but do you have any? We can have a look at this in a second. But do you have any problems so far?
No, I don't. I did have a problem because in the beginning I wrote my code for Android Marshmallow and above, and this is Android Lollipop.
Right.
So I had to make some specific feature change. Something was there.
That's something again for you, Johnny, to bear in mind, right? So go as relatively low as possible, so your app runs everywhere. So, but you don't need to do those expose changes once you realize, oops, now I want to test another phone, so I need to rewrite my entire code. Yeah. So think about a reasonable API level to have maximum catchment.
I think TensorFlow supports down to 21.
Okay, cool.
That's
if I remember.
So then
I have 24 home now, but I could change it.
So, well, even if you compile to 21, it still runs on yours anyway, right? So that's not a problem. So just to bear that in mind, especially during development, else you spend time adapting it, or run out of time, don't adapt it. So, but it's an easy one, to save time, I guess. But yeah, cool.
Yes. So the next step would be to figure it out that how can I set up a reminder based on the location of 2 users. That's the thing. So I will need a third entity here.
Yeah.
So I need to figure it out how I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah. Can you you probably know that the concept, but Johnny, you may have heard it. Can you pitch the entire scenario so that everyone has a shared understanding? So you want reminder based on location. Why the 2 users?
Why the 2 users? For instance, let us say that I have given my notes to Binu, and I would like to recollect it. So if Binu and me we are in the distance range of, let us say, 100 meters, then a reminder pops up.
Cool.
So that's a one particular application of it.
So in this case, you kind of rely on a third entity, right? Some server or whatever else that facilitates it. So there is a project, and I may be able to dig out or get access to the code of that. That Marish has done with a student last year, or it's actually a master's project, and they looked into using SMS for that purpose. So instead of having a centralized service, well, SMS is actually kind of a centralized service, but point is, the idea is that the system uses data SMS to send the current location of the respective other party, right? So your phone would kind of, your phone would trigger, okay, where's Binum right now? And his phone would automatically respond basically the current location as a data SMS. You wouldn't see it in your text. So he would know your location. Downside is obviously quite expensive, right? I mean, I'm not sure if you pay for text SMS.
No, actually, there are some services, web services.
It's free. Usually it's included in the
subscription. Yeah, cool. So if that's the case, then it's relatively affordable. Obviously, it needs to be reasonable because you want the system to be proactive, right? So you don't want to explicitly say, well, now I want to know where he is, but rather you want to have the system tell you, oh, he's actually in the same area, right? So
in this case also there's a third entity, right?
Implicitly anyway, any network provider in itself is a third entity already, right? So because you won't have a direct ad hoc Wi-Fi connection anyway.
Can we make this, I know this might be a very abstract question.
Yeah.
Can we make this on a decentralized level, just me and you? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know whether I'm asking the right question or
not. No, you're asking the right question.
Because there's a lot of research is going on to decentralizing the web.
Yeah. Yes, no, I agree with you. Well, the only thing I could think about of how to decentralize that problem would be something, we want to capture states. We want to have a network that is persistent. Kind of, in theory, you could use something like blockchain technology in principle, because it's decentralized and nodes can leave and nodes can enter and they can, come back and so on. And the system, the network kind of needs to be, but the network needs to have sufficient catchment. So we have sufficient participants, so the blockchain is still alive when you come back, right? Because if nobody's running it, then it's not existing anymore. So that's definitely a challenge. There's this kind of bootstrap problem, how to ensure that everybody, or that this instance of the blockchain, kind of a decentralized blockchain application is actually running at all times. That's the tricky one. Good, very good question. The question is spot on. But you could also go down. I mean, for your problem, it probably won't realistic. It's more like a theoretical, conceptual direction, because it's very unlikely that you simply have enough adoption in the first place, so that's actually reliably working, right?
Yes, I mean, that's why I said.
Yeah. I know what you mean. It's a really good thing. So that would be something definitely you want to, think about and flesh out conceptually anyway. But I'm not sure right now. I need to think about this more if I find a solution that corresponds to your problem, or perhaps worthwhile looking into peer-to-peer networks in a wider sense. There was, for file sharing, you probably recall that ones that have been used, and there are also similar ones just for communication sharing. So that would be one thing to look at. But I think in the end, you would end up using something like a hybrid service, where you have one server-ish somewhere running on AWS or some cloud, or here with Prod 3 or whatever server we have. And this would just provide you with a reference to your phone, and then you could do a peer-to-peer connection from there on. Because your IP, your identifier changes all the time, right? Depending where you are. If you're here in France right now, or also in Europe, and so on. But you would both obviously be linked and registered to that directory service, and this would allow you to basically spawn off a peer-to-peer connection from that central service. Kind of a hybrid approach, where you don't really rely on the central service for all communication, but for the initial initiation of your connection. So that would be a possible pathway. That is a very feasible pathway, where you have kind of a mix of both. You still have this autonomous communication as soon as you're linked up, but just to make the initial connection, you need to have a central service there. So yeah, there's pros and cons. I mean, probably something to explore, which road to go down: peer-to-peer network or hybrid network, hybrid systems. I suspect to start off, it's probably easier to think about centralized or hybrid systems, and then even if you use a centralized system first, you write a server and you have your client and you have interaction, you can think about, okay, how much information do I need to make the connection peer-to-peer? Yeah, so just to identify what is control protocol and what is actually data protocol as part of your application, and perhaps separate those two ones so you can redirect the data part later on, right? So for communicating.
There can be some direct to peer-to-peer connection.
Exactly. So then you have a peer-to-peer connection, but it requires you again to know your endpoint IPs. So the tricky one. It's also not necessarily eased by having corporate firewalls. For example, if you're using Wi-Fi, right? So then your IP is obviously not yours, right? So it's a dynamic possibly anyway, but it's also a private IP. And for example, if you're here on Wi-Fi, you actually probably won't get a public IP, right? I suspect you will have some sort of from the class A network, like 10 dot something or whatever else, or 192 dot something, meaning. If you're outside of Jobbik right now and you want to connect to and he's on the Wi-Fi here, you won't be able to have a direct connection anyway, right? So in this case, you would, by necessity, rely on some sort of external public party. So it'd be very, very hard. So the only case where it actually would or could work would be if both of you are actually using your mobile data, because you have endpoint IPs. So the system needs to be able to accommodate that as well. So as a fallback, I think you kind of always need to think about a centralized solution, because either one of you may just be on Wi-Fi, and realistically, most of the time, I'm, for example, on Wi-Fi when I can, because data is expensive. So that's something, I think you have multiple pathways there, and you need to think about desirable and realistic. So, and realistic is probably something centralized, especially to get going, and something where you can move from there is the decentralized bit. And I would probably think about how to build your protocol in a way that accommodates both kind of approaches. But so I would put, if I were you, I would look into peer-to-peer networks, what's out there right now, what's available, and if there's any solution of how to retain unique identifiers in private networks. If there's any way of linking this public-private network identifier, which is probably very hard or not possible unless you use UPnP, which is not something you want to look into because it's just too involved right now. Because, for example, this year the university won't allow UPnP anyway because it's too dangerous. UPnP is about opening ports from the inside, so an outsider can connect, which is generally not something you find in corporate firewalls, but something you find in home firewalls for games, for example, where you need to have a game server that needs to be accessible from the outside. Your game can actually open upon a firewall, stuff like that. But I think it's too networky at that level. That would just be, dragging the focus of your application too much to that level. So I would think about start out with a centralized service, and then it's worthwhile. And then, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So basically, look in this trajectory. How can you start with, central/hybrid, and then what would be the next steps to be done to get a fully decentralized solution, right? It's always tough. I mean, decentralized, even if you have a decentralized solution, you still need a unique entry point, right? So you would have needs have some sort of DNS pointer that points you to at least one node in the decentralized network. Yeah, or maintain something like a distributed hash table of all the last known nodes in that decentralized network, and hopefully one of them is still in that network. Because if they're decentralized, they just opt out because they're switching off their phone, going to bed, right? So suddenly this entry of your DHT is already voided, right? So now there would be a timeout, would be removed. But in worst case, if there's not enough adoption, for example, those guys don't participate, we have 3 or 4 members perhaps in your network, it's very likely that the decentralized network would not exist at all times. So that's the tricky bit there. So there's a lot of secondary constraint issues that are not related to your actual application problem, but that would fundamentally affect whether it works or it doesn't. Does it confuse you or help you?
No, it's not. Actually, I was just very curious about this, decentralized applications.
Yes, it is. It's a very hot topic.
Yes, it is very. Yes.
It is very hot. You're absolutely right. In fact,
so, what do you think? I mean, how far is it to make the internet completely decentralized? How far is it from being a reality? Because I see a lot of researchers trying.
Yeah. So depending what do you see as decentralization? Because I mean, why do you think the internet is not decentralized?
I have a meeting on.
Oh, sorry. Yes, please. Yes, absolutely. Sure. Sorry for keeping you.
What are you after?
Will be free by 1:30.
Well, you guys had some networking somewhere teaching about networking? No, it's a valid answer. It's perfectly fine.
We have had when I'm producing but not into this program.
Cool. So what makes you think that the internet is not decentralized? Just to start off with a question, we'll get there.
Yes, because I see that few big companies are actually holding.
Okay. So you're thinking about the infrastructure provider.
Yes, that Facebook, Uber, or Google, they're holding the data. That's what I think.
Okay. So because network is always a tough one, right? What level are you looking at? Are you looking at the connectivity level, right? So connectivity, so just about making contact between 2 IP addresses. But or is it like more on the higher levels where you have actual applications that are there? Because in the middle level, the internet should be independent of applications, right? So I mean, when I grew up, there was no Facebook, there was no Google, there were 5 search engines. They were equally bad, So you just pick your pick. It's just the fact that we as users decided that we want to go for Google. You can still use Bing, I mean, or Yahoo still exists. So whatever else, crash the search engine. But this is application level. This is really more driven by adoption. We ourselves kind of decide, right? If you weren't saying, I'm not going to Facebook, but I'm going to Google Plus, or any other of those, again, secondary services, it would be different. We users kind of lead to that centralization. But when I think about centralization in internet, I think about, well, we have a lot of public IPs. Each of us has, 4.3 billion unique identifiers on the internet-ish, which are used up. So we need IPv6 and all that magic, all good. But this is in principle decentralized, because as soon as I know Johnny's unique identifier, I can interact with him if we have some sort of connectivity. Yeah, I don't rely specifically on you or anyone else other than having some routers in between, but we can actually ping between our devices, share communication. Problem, however, is how do I figure out what his identifier is? Yeah, because your public IP, in your home router possibly as well, changes every 24 hours, right? So it's pretty hard to keep track of what his physical or even a logical identifier in the network is. And this is where centralization comes in. That's where we have the DNS network, right? Domain name service, right? Because that's precisely what it does. It just takes a human readable name, which doesn't change, let's say google.com, but points to all their individual addresses. And the addresses can change every day. We won't care. We couldn't care less, in fact, because the DNS system always resolves the name to the IP. So this is where centralization comes into place, because the DNS system is inherently hierarchical, right? So there can only be one google.com. Right? So we kind of always rely on that particular service, even though there's made copies of that one for different DNS servers, so it's fast. But fundamentally, it boils down to the top DNS server in that particular hierarchy to define what google.com points to. Yeah, and this is the hierarchical part of the classical internet, where I agree with you saying, why is the internet centralized? And the challenge there is simply we need to have some central registry that tells us, which identifier belongs to which individual. That's the key problem there. And that's, even if you're talking about decentralized networks, for example, blockchain technology, you still need an entry point. It could be as simple as something, yourblockchain.com, but your program needs to know what to look for and whom to connect to, because again, we have 4.3 billion internet IP addresses, and that's just the IPv4 ones. Which one would it choose? How would it know? Or if you make the assumption that there's one fixed ID, I think at this stage you gave up on the idea of decentralization again, because you're assuming a fixed IP address again. So decentralized is about having a flexibility of changing IP addresses. So there's always the shortcoming of having at least one entry point, and then you can kind of go and be decentralized. That's the principle of those directory services as well, right? So like if you talk about a hybrid communication, like Skype, precisely the same thing. You have one directory service you connect to, with your unique identifier, right? Until Skype, whatever, right? But only one person can have it, right? So. But when I want to call you, I need to look up where you are and if you're currently connected, and then Skype basically shifts from a hierarchical model where the directory service knows everything about your number of contacts, age, and all whatever where you are right now, to a peer-to-peer connection. That's the hybrid kind of approach. And DNS fundamentally works the same way. First, we look up whatever is the domain name. It points us to an IP. From then on, we're sweet, and we kind of can exchange our information. And even if our IP is updated, we can say, hey, 5 minutes ago, you reached me and the IP is following. Now my IP is as follows. That's fine. But you need to make that link somehow. And that's where decentralization starts to work in the first place. So having a fully decentralized system requires you again to know at least one member of that decentralized network. We generally can't make that assumption. It's very hard. If you give me, for example, again, your application, I need to have some entry point. In worst case, it's a fixed IP. In best case, it's some DNS name that you registered. But again, it boils down to you. If you, for example, have my peer-to-peer blockchain .com, but if you fail to renew your registration, that's it, right? That's where your application suddenly breaks, and then this time you realize, oops, it was centralized as well. So it's really a matter of definition where you see it. So it's both looking at what application level. So that's I think our consumer decisions that we actually make, whom we trust and whom we want to work with. But on a connectivity level, we have the same kind of problem. And this is the only problem we can't really solve. This, in my view, is a problem we can solve. We could just switch from Facebook to someone else. But we need to have some sort of directory system that tells us who is who. Yeah. So that's at least the. Does it help? You
Yes,
understand it?
yes, I understood something, I would say, yes, because I know what is a DNS server is.
Right. So DNS is really like, you know, the basically a name resolution mechanism,
Yes,
right?
it
So
resolves the host name to its IP address.
that's correct, right? So we have, you know, top layer domains like com.no, you know, UK, and then a second layer, which is from, for example, NTNU, and NTNU is pointing to particular IP addresses and so on. They may have, you know, further hosts as part of that, you know, subdomains. For example, server1.ntnu.no, and they point to particular IPs and so on. So, and that's kind of a system of DNS servers that is hierarchical in its nature. Because if you don't know where to start, you always need to go to the top. That is the .no, for example, right, or .com or whatever else, the top layer, and you work your way down. But this system, if that fails, the internet fails as well. So again, centralized. Yeah. If, for example, half of the routers of the world fail, you're probably still okay. You know, some people are still connected, you can interact with them. But if central servers of the DNS system fail, and I think there's 13 root servers right now, and that's why we have 13, so we at least have, you know, a bit of replication. But if all those were to fail, that would be an interesting exercise, you know. So again, centralized system. So, anyway, but you know, with respect to your research, coming back from the big problems to the hopefully more manageable problems.
Yes, sure.
Do you have any particular significant roadblocks right now in your progress?
No, there is. I mean, it was there till I would say yesterday night.
Yeah.
But then I had to change the code according to the Android lollipop and above.
Oh yeah, cool.
The thing is there. So now it's okay. Now it's okay. I will move on to the next step, I would say.
Cool, sweet, good. Cool. So you guys are on track, I think. Any questions, worries? No one watching? Well, it's good and bad at the same time, but they can catch up. I'm a bit surprised that no one really showed up, even though they make good documents. Any reasons you might think of?
They are just very casual.
Is it, yeah? Is it often like that, or what?
No, I presume so, I would say.
Yeah, I talked to Björn, and he didn't have his phone, so he wasn't updated, but I told him that he
No, but I'm surprised because I did the Google poll, and people answered and committed, and I sent the email last night, and still no one shows up. Anyway, so I hope whoever is watching, and if you're watching, please make contact because it's in your own interest to refine your work a bit and get the opportunity to get some feedback, hopefully. Just to ensure that everyone is on track, right? Because the semester is kind of halfway through-ish. Really?
Yes.
And you know, it's time to actually get something done, right? So, but I'm not worried about you guys. So all you three, I think you're sounds like you're on track. At least you will definitely have something presentable at the end, and that's good. That's what you want. So, I don't know. Good. Any other thoughts, ideas? No? Cool. Right, let's leave it at that then. So thanks for making your way here. Next week, as usual, 9:30. We'll start at the Game Technology Lab, and hopefully there's no one there. We can stay there, else we move downstairs again, right? So downstairs we were in A something, but as Anto said, the setup is really not nice for having this kind of group talk. So it's not a perfect environment, but kind of feasible. But let's just start in the Game Technology Labs and go from there. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you.